interesting thing about Husserl is from, there's many interesting things. So from this kind of phenomenology, it was taken up by psychology, it was taken up by philosophy, it was taken up by Heidegger. And I've sort of discussed a little bit of how Heidegger did that. Heidegger essentially thought that Husserl was falling back into idealism somewhat, because Husserl is trying to say that there is no world unless I perceive it, as it were. Intentionality is always conscious of something. If I'm describing what I see and feel and hear, if I'm, it's almost like if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, doesn't make any noise. Husserl's almost saying, well, it doesn't, because it's irrelevant to our philosophical project, because I have to be there and describe the noise it makes when it falls. If there's no humans there, it's not part of the philosophical project, because I don't care whether the world exists. Heidegger wanted to really sort of bring the embodied self right down, and the example of the hammer is that, where he says, Husserl's still stuck on consciousness a bit. Husserl still can't let go of the Cartesian idea. In fact, Husserl wrote a late book called Cartesian Meditation, where he almost accuses himself of the same thing, that he can't let go of this idea of consciousness as the guiding thing. Heidegger thought consciousness was a mistake in lots of ways. There is an extreme position, which was not Heidegger's, but it fascinates me, called epiphenomenalism. And epiphenomenalism claims that that consciousness does nothing, that we have this little thing in our head that is basically along for the ride, and everything I'm doing now, everything I'm saying and so forth is just body doing it, and consciousness is just going, wow, I'm doing this, but it's not actually. Now that's kind of an extreme version of all of this.
Oh, okay, like the extreme in the other direction. Like there's nothing that we ever do consciously.
No, that's right. You were just stroking your chin unconsciously, I'm sure.
Right.
But also it would say everything you just said was unconscious, and every decision you make is already, your body has decided that. And if you're hungry, you'll eat something. You'll later think, well, I decided to have the tomato sandwich rather than cucumber sandwich. Actually, that was all going to happen. So that's an extreme version of it. Nothing that Heidegger would do, but it's trying to get away from that idea that consciousness is somehow in control. For Heidegger, he thought a minimal amount of our work in life is conscious. He thought a huge amount of it was unconscious, was reflex, was various things, the body going about things. And that he didn't say that as a bad thing. We shouldn't fall into the trap again of saying consciousness good, body bad. He thought that was just normal, and philosophy had failed to capture that, had failed to acknowledge that was actually the normal state of being, that we're not conscious all the time. You can do a little experiment, just after you finish watching this, just spend the next 5 or 10 minutes trying to be conscious of everything you're doing. You'll collapse in a screaming heap. It's impossible.
That reminds me too of this ideal or this idea in rationalism that's been applied to a lot of ideas in modern science, especially especially economics, for example. This idea that supposedly, quote unquote, man is a rational animal. But again, to go back to Jonathan Haidt, who's one of my favorite authors in terms of social and moral psychology, along with people like David Sloan Wilson and oh crap, I'm forgetting the last guy's names, but there are 3 main guys who talk about this a lot, but among many others, of course, that people don't behave rationally. We basically just start from our intuitions, and we just rationalize forward from our intuitions. And like you were saying, and like Heidegger says, we don't even do things consciously or for rational reasons most of the time. It takes a lot of work to do that, because our prefrontal cortex is the newest part of our brain, so it's evolved for a shorter amount of time than the other parts of our brain that are not involved with thinking rationally and critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that they talk about stuff like confirmation bias, don't they? That you're much more inclined to sort of believe something that suits you than you are to believe something that doesn't suit you, and all of those things. And I think that's a huge part of political theory now, isn't it? That we are guided much more by instinct than by anything else. And I think some people have been shocked by the kind of return to that in the last few years, where it does seem a much more instinctual sort of way of being in the world and way of being in politics. So these thinkers, from Husserl, and then you go through Sartre and Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, Blanchot, all of these thinkers, they're kind of having taken this step of looking at how the world is constructed and how it goes on. Really have done a lot of fascinating work, and continental philosophy, I think, stems from this kind of these original insights of Husserl, and continue to do so.